rectangles are my jaw again, just as they were over here. But note what I've done is I put an opening in my dermal roof. So this is part of my old dermal roof. This is part of my old dermal roof. And I'm making a space, an opening in the side of the skull. Why is that good? Well, because now you can do things like this. You have a lot more places where you can attach it, and you can, your jaw closing muscle, and you can actually wrap it around the outside of that skull. So this is doing two things potentially for you. Look at these muscles now. When this muscle contracts, it's not constrained by the dermal roof anymore because it's outside the dermal roof instead of inside of it. The same thing that is true down here with these other muscles. They're coming up and attaching to this old part of the dermal roof. There. And you have jaw muscles that are like this now because they're external, they're not constrained. So when you chew gum, you might get a headache up in here. Even if you grit your teeth, you should be able to feel a little bulging in there. That's because one of your major jaw closing muscles goes up the side of your skull and right by your cheeks. You'll feel a bulge. That's your, what's called your masseter muscle. That's this muscle over here contracting. Right? So you have two major jaw closing muscles. They're not constrained anymore. So evolutionarily speaking, you could add more fibers because now they have room to bulge. And also this wrapping around of the muscles potentially provides a better attachment point, stronger attachment. So an analogy might be in a tug of war. If one group is able to wrap that rope around a fence post and the other one can't, then the ones that have it wrapped around the fence post probably are not going to lose that particular tug of war. Right? So it's a loose analogy, but it is true. Wrapping it around like this, and then we can attach it to a rigid bone up at the top. Okay, so the solution is temporal openings. It allows the muscles to bulge and gives slightly stronger attachment points, so we can then have stronger muscles. Stronger muscles then would open up more niches, more feeding niches for these animals. All right, let's see if I can draw this. So there's my eye right there. That would be my temporal opening. One solution, remember I said that there were different solutions independently evolved. We're pretty sure they were independently evolved because the location of the temporal opening varies in different groups. So for example, one group, which were called synapsid reptiles, the junction between bones called the squamosal and the postorbital, those two bones join dorsal to the opening. And so this is just how we're defining synapsid reptiles. One temporal opening beneath the junction of the squamosal and the postorbital. We have another group called euryapsid reptiles. They evolved a temporal opening, but that opening was above the junction between the squamosal and the postorbital. And then there's another group called diapsid reptiles who actually evolved two temporal openings. And the junction between the squamosal and the postorbital is actually in between those two openings. Now, the condition without a temporal opening is called anapsid. So we have anapsid, synapsid, euryapsid, diapsid. Often we just call these different conditions of the skull. They're referring to the presence of temporal openings or not, and where exactly are those temporal openings located. They've been used a lot in taxonomic classification of reptiles. So, this is why you will see subclass Synapsida. I think we brought that up last time, didn't we? Who's in subclass Synapsida?
Turtles.
Turtles. Okay, so turtles have an anapsid skull. They do not have a temporal opening. All right, so when you look at that alligator snapping turtle back there in the corner, its skull has been eaten away, so to speak, over evolutionary time from the rear. But there's not an opening strictly through the temporal region. That eating away, if you will, from the back is accomplishing the same purpose, but it's not a true temporal opening. An opening goes right through the bones of the temporal area. So our turtles today are anapsid in condition. They have no temporal opening. Subclass Synapsida, these are extinct reptiles, but they're exceedingly important because of what they gave rise to. Anybody know? Yeah, mammals. All right, so they're extinct, but they are in the line towards mammals. So, if we just look at our little deer friend right here, when you look at the side, you can see the eye orbit without any difficulty. But then you look behind it, there's a hole. That's the remnant of the temporal opening. So that this structure here, which is called the zygomatic arch, is the remnant of that dermal roof. I erased it. So the zygomatic arch. And that's where a lot of the jaw closing muscles will attach. Now, not all mammals have a complete bony ring around the eye orbit. Many of them, it's open, so there's one continuous opening between the orbit and the temporal opening. But this is a good example of a modified synapsid skull. And then when I put the jaws in where they belong, it'll let me. That's good. Note that you have this long process. That's where the muscle attaches that comes from the top of the head. It comes from the top and then down onto that process. You have a very wide region over here, and that's where the muscles are going to go up to the zygomatic arch. All right, so the muscle you can feel in here versus the muscle you can feel on the side of your head. So mammals have a modified synapsid skull. They are derived from reptiles in which a single temporal opening occurred with the boundary between the squamosal and postorbital dorsal to that opening. There's another subclass that's extinct called the Euryapsids, Euryapsida. And of course, they had a Euryapsid skull, that single temporal opening, but with the junction between the squamosal and the postorbital below the opening. This is an extinct group of marine reptiles. They went nowhere. They just died out naturally. Now, we have these other two subclasses of the reptiles, and they are both characterized by having a diapsid skull. So your lizards and snakes have a diapsid skull. Your Archosauria, the crocodilians, the dinosaurs, had a diapsid skull. So if you look at our friend over here, we have the eye orbit right there. But if you look up in the temporal area, you'll see two holes on either side. Right? So this is a diapsid reptile. The archosaurs are the ones that lead to the birds. And so birds have a modified diapsid skull. Hard to tell it when you look at an adult bird, but you can distinguish it in their embryonic development. All right, so this is an adaptation that presumably opened up a lot of niches by allowing many reptiles to have a much stronger bite than they would otherwise given the size of their body. We put that opening in the temporal region and we attach our muscles to the outside of the skull instead of having them constrained in that space between the dermal roof and the chondrocranium. Okay. Oh, yeah, I was going to show it up here. This is a useful diagram in two different ways. If you look up at the top, it summarizes these transitions. So the primitive was the anapsid, where there is no temporal opening. Then you can go to the euryapsid, and you can see that the postorbital and the squamosal are joining beneath. You can go from the most primitive condition up to the synapsid, so that you have those two bones joining on top of the temporal opening. Or you can go from the anapsid to the diapsid, because remember, these three changes all evolve independently in different groups. And then in the diapsid, you can see that the postorbital and the squamosal are coming together between the two temporal openings. So from the diapsid, you can go up to the modern lizards, or you can go to the modern birds. And from the synapsid, you go up to the modern mammals. And then at the bottom are just some little bit better drawings of cross-sections showing you the location of those jaw-closing muscles. Okay, so that here in the anapsid, the muscles are constrained between the dermal roof and the chondrocranium. Here with the diapsid and here with the modified synapsid, you can see that those muscles are really exposed to the outside world. There's lots of room for them to bulge. You're bulging up against the underside of the dermis as opposed to the hard dermal roof. Oh, and if you have trouble remembering, does it join above or below, just remember you can do your best. So if it's below, it's euryapsid, and the synapsid, it's on top. Remember, the more dumb you